And welcome back to Comical Opinions. This is Gabe Hernandez, and today we have a review of James Bond 007, number 2 from Dynamite Comics. In this issue, Bond finds himself at the center of a manhunt to keep him off the trail of thieves who have stolen a devastating weapon of mass destruction. But before we get started, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit that bell for notification. Your attention is greatly appreciated. Make sure to stay to the end of this review for the final tally and the score. Let's get into the credits. James Bond 007 number 2 is written by Garth Ennis, art by Rafa Labosco, colors by Jorge Sutil, letters by Rob Steen, and the main cover, which is the only cover, drawn by Dave Johnson. Okay, so before we get into the meat of this issue, let's talk about what happened in the last issue. So what we learn in this particular James Bond adventure is that the British science research weapons labs have been developing a weapon of mass destruction, which they originally stole from the Russians, who in turn originally stole the technology from the Nazis during World War II. This weapon, when activated, essentially flash freezes everyone within its radius, but it leaves all the buildings and resources and technology intact. It's basically the dream weapon of mass destruction because it kills the enemy, but it leaves all the resources. And it's sort of the holy grail of weapons of mass destruction. We find out that somebody stole the weapon. Now that the intelligence agency, the British intelligence agency, figured out how to make it work because everything was theoretical up to this point. And as soon as they figure out how to make it work, somebody breaks in, steals it, tortures all the records and the logs, and now we're off. So James contacted the 00 agent by the name of Trion, who was part of the infiltration team for British intelligence that originally stole the technology from the Russians. And he finds out that, some little tidbits of information, but during the meeting, their little beachside conversation is ambushed by a group of mercenaries. James, of course, is prepared for the attack and dispatches the mercenaries in short order, but he keeps one of them alive long enough to extract some information. So now we pick up with this issue, James Bond 007 number 2. What happens in this issue? James is heading back to his office because his car has been blown up during the mercenary attack. He has to take public transportation, much to his chagrin and much to Moneypenny's amusement. And before he gets to off the bus into his apartment, he's ambushed by a larger group of mercenaries. Mayhem ensues. A very large gun battle where it's just one James Bond against a group of many. I think I lost count. It was somewhere near a dozen armed, Kevlared, and ready to go mercenaries who are trained to either take him alive or die trying. And they are not supposed to be captured, which we find out in gory detail throughout the fight. Eventually, James Bond does survive, as you can imagine, because he is the best of the best. And afterwards, the tidbit of information he got from the first group of mercenaries in issue number 1 and a little bit of detective work leads him to believe that a former research scientist that was working on the weapon who retired for shall we say ethical disagreement with the purpose of the weapon might be their lead candidate because he was a Polish national or of Polish descent. He believes that there's connections to the Russians in his family tree, and he thinks that he might be the guy that at least knows something about why the weapon was stolen. And that leads us to the big cliffhanger, which is, well, we got to track down this research scientist who quit several years ago. Where is that research scientist now? Dun, 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 he's in the International Space Station. So now we get, as the cliffhanger, James Bond in space, which is can be a hit or miss depending on how it's pulled off. But Garth Ennis is more of a hit than a miss kind of guy. So hopefully it'll be a good one. Uh, so what do we think about James Bond 007 number 2? First of all, crack-a-lack in action. There's a big gunfight that takes up a majority of the chunk of the issue. It's fast-paced, it's energetic, it's hard-hitting, it's surprisingly gory. You get guys getting shot in the crotch. You get guys who are getting crushed and their eyeballs are popping out. You get limbs flying everywhere. You get people dying in very brutal, very violent ways. This is more violent and more gruesome and gory than the typical James Bond comic we've gotten out of Dynamite in several years. That's not to say it needs to be gory, but it's surprising that you see it, and it's probably more authentic, more realistic, and more grounded. That when guys are getting shot in the crotch, that's not a pleasant situation. So you definitely see a lot of that. Um, when James gets the information from the mercenary from the first issue, he does go through a fair bit of detective work and I should say, political strategic thinking about who might be involved and why. So they talk through between him and M. They talk through different motivations. Who are the different intelligence agencies that might be involved? What are the motivations for the Russians? What are the motivations for British intelligence? What does that mean for the people who worked on these initiatives? And of course, the obligatory phone call from Felix Leiter from American CIA helps give James just that little bit of extra information to kind of seal the deal that he might be on the right track with this scientist who quit several years ago. So lots of smart, well, I would say smart detective work, but lots of gritty, gritty brutal, violent action, which is the big play of it. Now, that's the plus side of it. What didn't we like about James Bond 007 number 2? Well, sort of the plus is the minus, because so much of this issue is taken up with that very large, extensive gun battle. There's not much plot development. You get the little bit of amusement while James Bond is forced to ride the bus. Then you have this huge gun battle that lasts quite a while, and then you have this conversation between James and M about tracking down leads. Who are the players involved? How did they come to pass in this situation and everything that comes along with it? So plot wise, it's a little thin. If you think about start to finish, how much progress have they made? Well, basically, it's a gunfight, which is a larger version of what happened in issue number one, and some conclusions that are reasoned out, if not confirmed, and that's about it. But the cliffhanger is the big wow moment, obviously, because James is now on a rocket up to the International Space Station to find this scientist, to see if that leads to the next discovery. So, quick word about the art. What do we think? The art was pretty good to solid. So Rafael Labosco gives you all that energy and excitement of James Bond as he's fighting his way through this small army of mercenaries. The violence is done well. Sounds strange, but yeah, it's done well. It looks authentic, or I should say realistic. Maybe a little bit gratuitous, but not too much. So overall, the art looks great, and you get plenty of action, plenty of excitement, and this is kind of what you want in a James Bond comic. Although, again, the light plot doesn't give you much to do other than just really enjoy and soak in this big gun battle. So, final thoughts. What did we think of James Bond 007 number 2? Uh, Plenty of action, plenty of good art. You do get a wow moment as the cliffhanger, but the plot is a little thin. So there's not much to really talk about this issue because the gunfight and the conclusion about where to go next is pretty much all there is to it. So it's a little thin, so there's not much to talk about story wise. But I think if you're just looking in it for the action and you like James Bond uh, getting in and out of impossible situations, you're probably going to like this comic. Therefore, we're going to give James Bond 007 number 2 a solid 8 out of 10. I hope you enjoyed this review, but before you leave, please like, share, comment, subscribe to Comical Opinions for more reviews and analysis every week. You have a great day.